Hello everyone, today we are looking at the topic decimals and we want to see if we can understand what decimals are and how to deal with them. So let's start off with a definition for decimals. Decimals are a representation of a portion out of 10, 100, 1,000 or other powers of 10. Therefore, a decimal is pretty much a common fraction whose unwritten denominator is a power of 10. And we can look at an example here. Let's say we have 0.3 as our decimal. Now, this decimal means 3 out of 10. So that's our portion, that's our quantity, 3 out of 10. Now, written as a common fraction, we know that can be written as 3 over 10 or 3 upon 10. And the fraction bar is what represents the phrase out of. Right? So that's 3 out of 10. So let's look at some of the features of decimals. A decimal is indicated by a decimal point before the numerator. The decimal point is used to indicate that the values to its right are portions out of 10, or out of 100, or out of 1,000, or out of whichever other power of 10. The place value of the number after the decimal point tells you which power of 10 is the denominator. So looking back at the example here, we have 0.3. Now, this 3 following the decimal point actually is a numerator, yes, which is the number 3 as we have here in the common fraction. And the unstated denominator would be 10. So how do we know that it should be a denominator of 10? So that's what we were saying as it relates to the place value. Because this 3 is only one place following the decimal point, we know that the denominator will be 10 because it's 3/10 as the portion. But as we go down further, you will understand more. Let's have a look at some examples here. So we have 0.7 as our first example. In fact, let me see if I can get it down here. So let's have a look here. So we have 0.7. Now what does that mean? That means 7 out of 10. A portion of 7 out of 10. And as a common fraction, we can write that as 7 upon 10. Now, how do we pronounce that? And we're going to use of a second with our pronunciation to kind of put it in context so that we can have an idea of what we're talking about. So as a common fraction, we know that we can pronounce this as 7/10, right? So it's the same thing for the decimal 0.7. We pronounce it just the same way as 7/10 because it is 7 out of 10. So we would say 7/10 of a second, for example. Let us look at 0.77. Now that means 77 out of 100. And as a common fraction, we could write that as 77 over 100. And how do we pronounce that? We pronounce that as 77 hundredths and in context of a second. 77 hundredths of a second, for example. Let's look at 0.17. Now that means 17 out of, tell me what is it out of. If you guessed 100, you would be correct. Because we are looking at two decimal places here. We're looking at a digit in taking up one space and another digit taking up the other space. So we have the number 1 in the 10th position and the number 7 in the 100th position. So that is why it's 17 out of 100. And as a common fraction, we would write that as 17 upon 100. And of course, you would pronounce that as 17 17 hundredths, and in context of a second. In our context, now that would be very fast. That in terms of speed, that would be very fast. All right, let's look at the other 4 examples here. So we have 0.07. Now, don't be deceived by this one. The 0 here in front, just in front of the 7, is actually very significant. It holds the 10th position. So we should think of it as significant, just as how the 7 is significant. So we are seeing digits taking up 2 decimal places. And if they take up 2 decimal places, it means that the portion will be out of 100, right? So this would represent 7 out of 100. So it's 7 out of 100. But of course, we don't have to write the 0 in front of the 7. So we leave it just as that, 7 out of 100. And as a decimal, we can that as 7 out of 100. And of course, we do not need the 0 in front of the 7. So we write it as that. And how do you pronounce 7 out of 100? How do you pronounce 0.07? It's actually 7 hundredths. And in our context, we will say of a second. Now that is even a very much faster speed. All right, let's look at 3 more. So we have 0.777. So we are seeing digits taking up 3 decimal places now. So of course, it won't be 100 as the unwritten denominator. It would actually be 777 out of, you guessed it, 1000. Now, do you notice that for each of these examples, the amount of decimal places taken up is equivalent to the amount of zeros following the 1 in the power of 10? Yes, you can use that as your guide as well. So we have 3 decimal places being taken up here. So following the number 1, we will have 3 zeros. So that will cause us to have 777 out of 1000. Now, as a common fraction, we can write that as 777 upon 1000. And we pronounce that as 777. Oh, this one is a long one. 77 hundredths, no, thousandths, and in our context of a second. So that's 777 thousandths of a second. Finally, let's look at these 2. And you can pause the video here and try to figure out these other 2 on your own. Alright, so now that you've paused it and thought about it, let's see if you have it right. So this penultimate one is still taking up 3 spaces in terms of the decimal point, 3 places following the decimal point. So we're going to have this quantity being out of 1000 as well. How about 0.007? This too takes up 3 spaces following the decimal point. So these zeros are significant. Do not take them for granted. So it would be something like 007 out of 100. Out of 1000, sorry. Alright, but of course, we don't need to write that those 2 zeros in front of the 7. So no James Bond style here. It will just be 7 out of 1000. And as common fractions, I will leave those up for you. And as the pronunciation, I will also leave those up for you to figure out. Alright, so here we have some activities for you to do, because it's all about practice, guys. The more we practice, the more we understand what is going on here. So we should write each of the following as a decimal. I just I just changed my mind. I think I will share with you these other two. Of course, for the fractions, we would have 77 over 1,000, and for the other one, we will have 7 out of 1,000, and we pronounce those as, this one would be 77 thousandths. And in our context of a second. And this one would be 7 thousandths of a second. Alright, 7 thousandths of a second. Alright, so pretty much what you're doing is pronouncing the fraction, how the common fraction would look. 7 thousandths, and in our context of a second. Now the activity here, you would see me having page 158 to 159. This would be taken from a book written by Raymond Tulsi. It's called A Complete Mathematics Course for Secondary Schools, Book 1. And if you should turn to page 158 to 159 of that book, you will see these questions. So thanks to Raymond Tulsi for his book and these questions. Now, these are not all the questions in the book, so if you want more, you can access that book to get more of the questions, but these are just some of the questions. So you are to write each of the following as a decimal. Same thing for number 2, but these are actually written as fractions. You're also going to do these here, converting decimals to common fractions. Alright, now with these ones, guess what's the trick? You will have to reduce these common fractions to their lowest terms. So let us look at, let me look at A and B for you. So for A, oops, sorry about that. So for A, we have 0.3. Now, we did that one already. So to write that as a common fraction, we would have 3 over 10. Now, can that be reduced any further? No, it's in its lowest terms. And how about B? We have 0.2. So as a common fraction, that would be 2 upon 10. But that can be reduced some more, because we can say 2 into itself goes once, and 2 into 10 goes 5 times. So our final answer in its lowest term, 0.2, can be written as 1 over 5. And before I go, guys, what if it were 1.2? Well, if it was 1.2, then the decimal would, the fraction would be 1 and 2 upon 10. And of course, that would simplify to give us 1 and 1/5. Alright, so that would be it as a fraction in its lowest terms. And if you want to convert it to an improper fraction, that is up to you, but we are quite fine with it being a mixed number for now. And that's it for today, guys. So I leave you up to do these questions on your own to get as much practice as possible. Remember the questions before that, so you can pause the video in order to work these questions on your own. All right, enjoy. Bye.